Hi, I'm Richard Friedman, and welcome to my video cartoon for October 28th, 2025. This is a series of cartoons that will encompass Richard's Trump-Ukraine war saga. From Putin, Alaska summit, to Putin calls, to Zelensky, and to China. On to China. Now here, this is a little bit of a flashback from the summit, the Alaska summit, when they were having their news conference, and President Putin retorted today when President Trump said that if he were president back then, there would be no war. I am quite sure that would indeed be so. I can confirm that. Okay, so President Putin here is confirming, saying he can confirm that had President Trump been president then, there would have been no war. Okay, and now here is President Trump making a statement. And he's saying, we really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. Many points were agreed to. There are just a very few left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, which is the territory, which we'll get to. The territory in the Donbass, in the western Donbass region. That was the most significant. Okay, from the way it worked out, okay, onward. But we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. Okay, and there was President Trump. And this was the news conference after their summit, and this basically sums up what took place there. Okay, there it was. Okay, now that's basically a flashback introduction. Now, leaving on that optimistic note, when President Trump left Alaska, now here we have another situation coming up here with President Putin, and now what's happening is probably I am surmising this, and I'm injecting my own possibility into this. Trump's awakening on Donbass territory after Alaska summit. So President Trump, after that summit, he might have been a little bit easygoing with Putin on that territorial dispute. You know, it's important, but we'll get by it, we'll get through it. But probably, and I'm saying only probably in my own thinking of trying to explain how this evolved, I think that President Trump was briefed or realized how significant that western Donbass region was to both Zelensky and to Putin. And there it is. Here it is right here. And you could see how this is the path here. Now Ukraine has all this area. Russia has all this area here. Now, President Trump says they have about 78% of the Donbass region, which looks about true. So this represents about 22% of the Donbass. But what happens here is that if you break through this, if Russian forces can break through here, they end up in Kiev, which is what they tried to do when they came through Belarus. They never got to Kiev. Here they'll have reinforcements, have a continuing line of reinforcements and everything, and be able to go right into Kiev. And again, all I have to do is capture this area here, and the Ukrainians have put up a stiff, strong battle here, and the Russians have not been able to take that area. And this is basically the gateway to Kiev, and perhaps to all of Ukraine, which again is what President Trump said, that Putin always believed that Putin wanted all of Ukraine. So he said he always believed that. So there it is. Okay, and that would make sense why President Putin would want this Donbass, this western part of Donbass, in order to complete this area, solidify this area, along with the prospect of taking Kiev and eventually the entire country. And here is, again, with that prospect in mind, President Trump now starts talking a little tough here, and he's going like this. He joked around saying that I asked Putin how he would like if we delivered about a couple thousand Tomahawk, those long-range Tomahawk missiles that could penetrate deep into Russian territory if we gave them to the Ukrainians. And President Trump said Putin didn't like that very much. So I drew here how it might have gone in that telephone conversation here. Okay? And there is Stalin here, who might be considered the father of, like George Washington is the father of America. Joseph Stalin, who led the Russians through a tremendous victory in World War II and defeated a Nazi invasion under his authority, under his rule as a leader of Russia. Now is considered here, so he might have had him on his wall there. The father, the founding father of the Soviet Union, and President Putin said the greatest tragedy in the history of that century was the fall of the Soviet Union, and that happened when the Iron Curtain fell, and then Germany was united, and all those other Baltic states started to get independent, and that that was it there. So President Putin is very determined, to put it mildly, to return, to put Russia on a direction to returning to the days of the Soviet Union. There's no question about that. And President Trump here is kind of joking around. he's on a little bit of joking around here, and he's saying here, Vladimir, man, I don't know if I call him Vladimir. Would you mind if I gave a couple thousand Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine? And that could, like I said, penetrate deep into Russian territory if the Ukrainians had their hands on 2,000 of those things. And then President Putin says, I do not like that proposal. Okay? Now, since then, President Trump said, well, we can't give Ukraine that because the learning curve is too great to teach them how to teach the Ukrainians. It would take 6 to 12 months to teach the Ukrainians how to work one of those Tomahawk missiles, as far as blasting them off and firing them and getting accuracy and this and that. The training is an extensive learning curve. So somebody's going to, pretty soon, somebody's going to write a book, Tomahawk missiles for dummies, and show it could be done in less than that. Tomahawk missiles for dummies. But anyway, I'm just making a joke there. It's no joke because President Trump is in a dilemma here, because President Putin means what he says, and he means that he wants Ukraine. And President Trump said when Putin spoke about Ukraine, it was the apple of his eye. It was the apple of his eye, So you know what that means. So there you have it. So in the sense that President Putin is beyond good and evil. It's beyond that. He embodies the will of Russia in his feeling about it. And so there is no good, no evil. It's Russia. And that is, from what I've read and everything, that's his position there. It's a very strong position. And President Trump here, joking around with a couple thousand Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, joking in a sense, and President Putin is getting here. Here we just see a bit of it. I do not like their proposal. So there he goes, and President Trump echoed that conversation on television to all of us. And then it went a little further than that. Of course, President Putin wasn't going to give Trump probably the last word on that. So what happened here is that the Ukrainian President Zelensky scheduled a meeting in the White House, in the Oval Office, with President Trump, where the main thrust of that was to get these Tomahawk missiles. He wants those 2,000. I don't know. He was expecting 2,000 of them, but he was expecting a good number of Tomahawk missiles. Do you know what he's going to do with that? So now Putin's gotten a little upset. Now, really getting upset, hearing that Zelensky is coming into town to get those Tomahawks. So he calls up and he says, "This is that's from what I've read and everything. This is probably what happened. The scheme of things, the trajectory." So what happens here is that he calls Donald Trump on a conversation, initiates the conversation with Donald Trump. And this is I made this up, how it might have gone, because nobody have spoken about that, how the conversation would have gone. And this is purely my creation, okay? And here it is here. And it's Putin initiated call to Trump before Zelensky meeting on Tomahawk, long-range Tomahawk missiles, okay? And here goes. Yes, President Putin's going to start this conversation off. He's calling Trump on this one, and he don't want no part of Trump encouraging Zelensky with the hope of getting those Tomahawks. So he's saying here, President Trump, would you mind going down in history for starting World War III over Tomahawks to Ukraine? There would go your Nobel Peace Prize forever, and your ballroom for the ages would be gone. Let's meet in Hungary, okay, and avoid WW3, which would not be confined to Europe. It won't stop. World War III will not be just Europe, like President Trump has been saying, that we have a big ocean between us and Ukraine, and it's over there. We don't got to worry about it. But President Putin's bringing it home, might have brought it home to President Trump. That's a little small world when you have these hypersonic missiles can carry nuclear warheads, and you and go zigzag along the way from outer space and all over that place, So President Trump might have thought to himself, well, this sounds like a good deal from Putin if he's gonna maybe negotiate here. So that sounds great. In Hungary, all right, here's how it went. So sounds great, Vlad. Sounds great, Vlad. No Tomahawks to Ukraine, and we work towards a ceasefire in Budapest. That's Budapest, Hungary, where the meeting was supposed to be. Okay, so that's how we went from the Tomahawks going possibly to Ukraine to now here we have no Tomahawks going to Ukraine with a meeting, a summit meeting for a ceasefire in Budapest, Hungary. Here we go. And on the trajectory, that's where it was there. Okay. Then we go to Zelensky coming out of his meeting with President Trump after that telephone call with President Putin. And Zelensky don't look too happy here. You can see that. There he is. He's not too happy. And he's saying here, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's response as to whether he was optimistic about receiving Tomahawk missiles after his meeting with President Donald Trump on October 17, 2025, after leaving the meeting without a firm commitment from the U.S. to supply the long-range weapons. And the reporter asked him, are you optimistic about getting those long-range Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine? And he says, I'm realistic. So there it is. He's realistic, meaning that very, very unlikely, to put it mildly. I'm realistic. And that was the turning point here. Okay? There was Zelensky. He's going down there. Very, very, somber. And here comes now the reporters go to the Oval Office here, and here's Benjamin Franklin, and here's a young George Washington, and here's Thomas Jefferson, and here's President Trump's gold ornaments there on top of the fireplace there, and here's President Trump sitting down there, and he's being questioned by reporters. And here's the backdrop. By October 27th, Trump had scrapped plans for the Budapest, Hungary summit. So Trump canceled that with Putin and imposed sanctions on Russian oil companies to target Russia's ability to fund its war machine. Trump in Oval Office taking questions. So what? President Trump is switching strategies. He's no longer the Tomahawks are gone. No question about the Tomahawks being gone. And he's going to go for the sanctions, So it used to be years ago, America was the arsenal of democracy, We were the arsenal that we get in there with this, that. Now we're the arsenal of tariffs because we go after you with tariffs. The arsenal of tariffs, okay? In a way, I'm joking about that, but it's not too funny. But I try to bring a little humor in, Okay? And here it goes. So President Trump is being questioned by reporters if he thinks that these sanctions on the oil companies, on these two big Russian oil companies, is going to bring President Putin to the table, to the peace talks on Ukraine. Okay, and he's saying, here he is, and he's saying this. There goes President Trump in response to reporters' questions, and he's saying this. I don't know these sanctions will bring Putin to the negotiating table. So he can't say that. They are tremendous sanctions on Russia's two big oil companies. Hopefully Putin will become reasonable and Zelensky will become reasonable. So now Trump is back to talking about them on equal terms, they're children in the schoolyard having a schoolyard fight in the schoolyard, and they're fighting over maybe a candy bar or some ice cream or something. All right, will become real. It takes two to tango. When we had a rigged election, I'm going back to the rigged election now with Biden, and all of a sudden I wasn't there. But he wasn't there because President Trump did, from what everybody says and all the investigations, lose that election legitimately. But President Trump feels otherwise, in spite of what the investigations and everything brought out, that there was no fraud or no mistakes made that could have overturned the elections. There might have been irregularities, but none that could have overturned the election was the basic fundamental conclusion. There were no irregularities that could have overturned the election. And President Trump continues here, and he's saying, calling it a rigged election, and all of a sudden I wasn't there. He wasn't there. Okay, wasn't there. That's true. He wasn't there. Okay. And there was then that Afghanistan. Well, that day on Afghanistan, I was sick to my stomach. I have to tell you that. To see all that, what went on there, I don't want to even go there. But I'm telling you that was a terrible day for America. And there's no, and Biden could go back and say, well, President Trump made this deal, and it was President, and it goes back and forth all the time. Like these things go back and forth. But it was a bad day for America and a bad day for the Biden administration, and that's the facts, okay? But it was a long time ago, you see. So what's talking about that now? What good does that serve? I don't know. I still do believe Putin wants to end the war. He wants to end the war with Ukraine under his belt, the whole Ukraine. Yeah, he wants to end. We want to win the war and take all of Ukraine. That is the truth. I think they both want peace. Well, they both want peace, but different outcomes of the war. They both want different outcomes of the war to get peace, okay? If I were president, it never would have started. So the war never would have started. If President Trump always injects that, it never would have started. The only way it would never started if he was given the green light to Putin to go in there and do what you want and discourage Zelensky and his troops from fighting back, then they would have taken over the whole country. I think that's the only way war could have been avoided, in my opinion. Okay, in my opinion. Okay, now here the final conclusion is Trump goes to China, and here it is. Now President, I'm going to read it to you. This is Zelensky. This is the ghost of Henry Kissinger, who was President Nixon's Secretary of State, who negotiated the Paris Peace Agreement that ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam. This was in the early 70s when the Vietnam War ended, and Henry Kissinger was an instrumental negotiator there, negotiating with the North Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, and that didn't end too pretty either, but he received the Nobel Peace Prize for that, and President Trump is after that Nobel Peace Prize, you can be sure of that. So, and President Trump did bring up Henry Kissinger when he was speaking about his envoy, Steve Witkoff, who was instrumental in bringing about a ceasefire in the Ukraine, in the war, over there in. I get confused a little bit. The war in Asia. Let's say that was the Gaza war. Gee, I'm thinking about going from one world to another world. The war in Gaza, the Gaza war, and he was instrumental in bringing about an end to the Gaza war. No question about that. Steve Witkoff served, and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner was there, and they both worked to get a ceasefire in Gaza with the Hamas, the terrorist group Hamas, and getting the hostages back, and they still have to getting those who are living back, and still working on getting the rest of them who are no longer living back. They got some of them back who are dead. So that was a great feat, and that can't go ignored. So I'm saying that. The ghost, so here it is, the ghost of President Nixon, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, returns to White House amid Trump on Asia trip. So he goes into, given President Trump had referred to his envoy to the Gaza war ceasefire talks, that was his envoy Steve Witkoff, as his Henry Kissinger, without the leaks. Henry Kissinger is known, they say he leaks. I don't know if it's true or not, but people have said that he leaked information from the Nixon administration. They said that, and Trump has bought into that. He don't like leaks. President Trump don't like leaks. And Trump indicated he wants to enlist China's help in bringing Russia to the peace table. So now, basically, President Trump has gone from threatening the Tomahawks to the tariffs, and now he realized that tariffs may not work. So now President Trump is trying another avenue, possibly, of getting China President Xi Jinping involved to get Putin to the tables. As part of it, there's also the trade agreements, and then there's Taiwan, that is coming up. Okay, he wants to enlist China's help in bringing Russia to the peace table, and President Trump has not ruled out running for a third term. The other day, President Trump said he's not ruling out running for a third term, not ruling that out. So here was Kissinger here in the White House. He's settling himself into the White House. Why President Trump into that room there where all the ornaments are, while President Trump is over in Asia, nobody's around, and he's settling himself in there as the ghost of Henry Kissinger. Okay, given President Trump mentioned him as he compared him to Steve Witkoff, only Kissinger leaks, he said. Okay, so here we go with this. And here goes Kissinger by himself there in that Oval Office as a ghost. And he's saying, now that I am a ghost who cannot leak, Trump, I'm a ghost who can't leak. Ghosts can't leak, that's for sure. Trump will meet with me when he returns. I will advise him to never get soft on Taiwan with China President Xi while he is president, and tell Xi to postpone any decisions on Taiwan until his third term is over in 2033. So in 2033, Trump will be ready to get out of office by then, who will have served his third term. Okay, that could get me an invitation to Mar-a-Lago. Trump's thinking to himself, well, if I'm going to support Trump for a third term as the ghost of Kissinger, then I'm entitled to be able to haunt Mar-a-Lago. Trump will invite me over there to haunt Mar-a-Lago, maybe. Okay, and that was it there. You see, so basically, Kissinger is advising President Trump here. Will advise when he returns to get Xi to cool it on Taiwan for a while until he's out of office, and then you see what you want to do then. As long as I'll be gone by then, I'll be very old. I'm not saying dead. I'm saying I'll be out of the White House. So anyway, so that's it, folks. God bless you. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.